What if our engineers could innovate instead of wasting time writing technical documentation? To answer this most pressing question, I brought in Karl Larsson. Karl is one of the founders of Aligned, and they help MedTech companies to make their technical documentation leaner by replacing Word and Excel. Karl has helped countless teams to accelerate market access and make change control less of a pain. In this episode, you're going to learn what's wrong with the modus operandi of MedTech today, how technical documentation can be done leaner, what effects this has on innovation speed, market access, and change control, and how such a system can facilitate the green transition in MedTech. Here's our discussion. Hi, Karl, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, great to be here.
Yeah. So, Karl, you are an expert in modern lean technical documentation in MedTech. Tell us, what is the most common mistake that MedTech companies makes when it comes to technical documentation?
Well, I think it's a threefold answer there. The first thing I think is that medical device companies, when you're a beginner at least, is that you underestimate how much work this is. This is a considerable amount of work. The measurements that we have done is that up to 50% of the time spent on developing a device is actually spent on documentation. And furthermore, I also think that these companies gravely underestimate how hard it is. It is not just writing documents and leave them be. And thirdly, I think they gravely underestimate what the consequences are if you end up with an incomplete, incorrect, or inconsistent documentation. If that happens to you, you're in big trouble and you might not even know it.
Yes. And I think what I also have seen in MedTech is that the usual, I would say, state-of-the-art modus operandi is like there is Word and Excel, which can be abused to do anything, basically. Those are the two most prominent documentation, let's say, tools that they're using. There is a Word, there is a text, and there are some references, cross-references with other documents, but those are like held and hosted and updated in Word and Excel. And what is your alternative that you're suggesting? And so, first of all, what is the problem with that? And secondly, what is the solution?
So even for a fairly limited medical device, the technical documentation consists of hundreds of documents. And these documents are created throughout the development lifecycle, which can be years. And that also means that there might be different people working on these different documents. Now, I have seen meters of binders at my customers with documents, really. And the annoying thing here is that these documents is, just as you're pointing out, interdependent. Yeah. So that means if you start making changes in one document, you might not understand that that has an impact on other documents, and changing one document may lead to that you end up in an inconsistent state because you might have two documents that contradict each other. Now, Word and Excel is not very good tools for managing this kind of interdependence. So that's one place where they fall short. And I also think that there is kind of a thought in the medical device companies that when you start writing the document, you have a pretty good overview. But when the amount of documents start reaching in the hundreds, it's not humanly possible for a single person to have all the content of all the documents in their head to know what the interdependencies are. And this is, of course, where software really can shine, because a software can manage these interdependencies very, very easily. But it comes with a shift of thinking about documentation then. If we want to try this approach and let a software try to manage these interdependencies, we need to go away from a document-centric perspective and start to talk about the design control item-centric perspective. So what we manage on the first place is no longer the documents as locus of information, but the individual design controls. Now, each company that we engage with, they have their own development process, their own design control structure, including how different design controls are interacting and therefore creating these dependencies. And if you tell a software what this expected structure is, the software has no problem to tell you, these are the linkages that exist. Here you have missing linkages. Now, if you change something in the middle of this plethora of design controls, what other design controls are potentially affected, and how can we address that? So this is where I think where software really can make a difference to manage these interdependencies. And I'm sure that you have seen a fair share of this kind of challenging situations yourselves.
Okay. So what you're suggesting is that there are two ways of documenting something. Number one is you just write documents, and then you have the interdependencies, and which is basically a mess in dealing with it, because like if you change a Word document, you need to change 17 others, and that is like a documentation effort that is never ending, because if you change it somewhere else, then you might be affecting even more stuff, and then like in the extreme case, you just need to rewrite everything with one small little change. And what you're suggesting is to separate documents, reports that someone can read, and the individual design controls, which probably is difficult for companies to articulate what those should be. Can you walk us through how you can shift a technical documentation that is currently in a Excel Word document form and extract everything you need and then go into a database approach? Walk us through how that will work.
Yeah, this is the very normal situation with customers that we engage with. They almost all have data in, as you say, in Word and Excel. They have this design control data. The first thing we take a look at is the development process. Best case, the development process talks concretely about design controls. And with design controls, I then mean things like requirements, specifications, user needs, use scenarios, different part of the risk analysis, verification, validation. So in best case, they state, the development process state that we have something called system requirements. The system requirements goes into a document called system requirements, whatnot. And then it's easy for us to then extract, okay, for this company, when they develop, they have chosen to document the following design control types. If that is not explicitly mentioned, we can try to work backwards and see, okay, what kind of artifacts does the development process indicate that should be delivered? And that's often names of documents. So they say that there should be a master verification plan. Okay, then there is probably something called a verification test case. So we can implicitly derive that. We need to have a risk assessment that includes identification, evaluation, risk control mitigations. Okay, then we have 3 different types of design controls right there. So we try to identify these design controls. And then the next step is to try to find out how do they relate to each other in terms of traceability. And again, in some companies, this is very explicit. So they have written down, when we do a product, we will provide the following traceability reports with these columns, with this data. And in some cases, maybe a bit unfortunate, it's not so explicit. It just says that, and we will supply the traceability, and not go into further details exactly what that entails. But if we can then extract that information, we have the design controls, we have the expected traceability, we can then use our tools that we have to extract this data from Excel sheets and from Word documents, convert it into a format that can be imported into aligned elements, and you can then quickly import them and then start letting aligned elements operate on these design controls. As you say, in the end, we will place the design controls, which then constitutes content of our documents. So we will recreate the documents that existed prior with these design controls. So in the end, the output looks very similar to the input that you already had, but you have a much better transparency now of the consistent state of these design controls.
So what you can, like, if I can translate that to a lay person, that will mean that your document that you just wrote that may have a version of a product in there. So there's version 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And so I make a new version, that is just an example. I make a new version, update the version in my document management system of this article, and I change it basically at the source. And every document that has this version referenced then basically will update automatically. So I have to change it once and all the documents, all the reports get updated when I do the change. Is that how you could translate that? What the output would look like for a user?
That would be one of the effects. Yes. So you can place any design control or other type of reusable information like the intended use or the classification or your risk benefit analysis details in as many documents as you like. And a system like Aligned Elements will then automatically know, okay, this guy placed these artifacts in these different documents for this particular reason at this point in time with this version. And if you decide, okay, let's update the intended use, we do that in one place. We ask the system, in which documents does this intended use occur? And you get a list of 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 documents. And you say, let's update these documents with the latest version of my intended use. Let's add an automatic change comment in there in the version history of the document. And that's it then. So this is a great way then to make sure that you are using consistent verbiage and consistent information in all these different documents in your technical file.
Okay, good. Let's translate that into outcomes, because like if you're very deep into technical documentation, and I'd say the quality managers of the listeners, they immediately understand what a benefit this system will bring. But let's go to a, let's say, management level. What does that mean in terms of time, market access, and reduced workload?
So our studies show that a tool like Aligned Elements can reduce the workload of a number of tasks. The creation stage is going to be approximately the same. So creating the content of the documents, that's just adding data. Of course, there are some upsides here in a system that you can reuse data. You can make use of content libraries that you have already prepared. So that's in the creation state. But of course, the big benefit happens in the modification stage when you start making changes. And of course, when you want to assess the consistency of your technical documentation. Now, for Word and Excel type of companies, they resort to manual reviewing. Okay. Both you and I have spent our fair share reviewing documents, so we can all relate to that experience. Okay. You put a lot of effort into the first 5 pages, but the last 238 pages might not get the same level of attention. All right. What happens then? It's very difficult for a human to detect all the possible errors there. You submit your documentation or maybe have it audited. The auditor will find a number of problems. You will go back, you will correct them, you will submit this again. The auditor looks at other places in the documentation, finds new errors, and you get into the cycle of trying to catch up with your own errors. Now, a software can find these errors in seconds and put them right in front of you. It can tell you, here's where they are, these are where they are, and even give you propositions to how to solve them. And that can save you a lot of time and grief.
So if you have deviations in an audit and you get deviations according to a few points, then you can basically detect where in the technical documentation those deviations are and how to resolve them. Does the system even tell you how would you resolve this documentation issue?
In some cases, it is possible, yes. So there is one-click resolution suggestions to found inconsistencies. If you don't do this, what we have seen in many companies that come to us, they are in this loop and they try to fix the errors. And they realize that it's not possible for us to find all these problems. They're hidden here in these hundreds of documents, in thousands of pages, but we don't know where they are. And that means that their confidence in their own documentation gets lower and lower. They don't trust their own documentation, and they fear the auditor and they fear the submission because we know that there are significant queues when it comes to accessing notified bodies today. So let's say that you're in a situation as a startup, you have created your technical file, you worked hard, you now submit it, and then everybody just sits and waits for the results to come back. The question is, what do your people do in your company when we're just sitting and waiting? Do you have a high burn rate? There's nothing you can do. You can't sell because it's not approved. Okay? So you're burning money, you're burning time, and then the auditor comes back and say, hey, your documentation is full of errors. All right? You need to correct them, and then we can start another cycle of 6 months of reviewing your documentation. So you can calculate a situation like this is how much does it cost me to have my team doing nothing for 6 months plus 6 months if I don't get my technical documentation correct.
Mm-hmm. Okay, good. But to come back to the question that I asked initially, you said like 50% of the time in a company or developing a product will be spent documenting. By how much can this be reduced if you use something like your system?
Yeah, we think that it can be reduced with 20 to 30%, which is a significant chunk. And you can think about who is actually creating these documents in your companies. It's good people, it's pros, it's medical device experts and professionals that you put sometimes to perform very menial tasks. Now, these are Ferraris stuck in a traffic jam creating your documents, okay? And you should let these wild horses free to innovate and work on your product because that's what they are best at. So shifting these very, very valuable resource that you have in your company from documentation tasks to actually creating value and creating better products. Can you imagine what an opportunity that is? This is gold lying on the floor in your company and just waiting for you to pick it up.
I think this is what we saw the last, I would say, like 5 to 10 years. It's like with the MDR, all our good engineers were stuck doing MDR documentation and getting up to the CE readiness for the existing products. And so you abused your R&D to do documentation work for the last 10 years. And everybody's complaining now that there's a lack of innovation in Europe. No wonder when all of the good engineers are stuck doing excellent Word documentation and 17 documents at a time that are multiple pages long. That is just not what a good R&D engineer is supposed to do. A good R&D engineer is supposed to innovate. And I think this was also the reason that for bringing you on, because this is a question that is extremely pressing, because I think we need to innovate more. And I think the need for innovation will be much greater in the next 10 years because there will be a lot of regulatory changes towards more green transition, I'd say. And on the other hand is we need to catch up with the rest of the world in terms of competitiveness. So how do you see such a system facilitating that?
Yeah, I think that I've been doing this for 20 years, and I'm very happy to see that the younger generation, they expect software support in all areas they work. And there might be a lingering cohort of people, maybe in my age, maybe a little bit younger, that still accept Word and Excel. But I think this is just automatically is going to disappear. I mean, the younger generation, they have higher expectations on their employers. I mean, they will see that the mechanical engineer has a top of the line CAD program to solve his tasks. Why should I use Word? Why shouldn't I use the best possible software out there to solve the problems that I have? I think this is a tremendous opportunity because it's also a domain where there is a lot to gain. I think it has been overlooked a little bit by the industry. They have focused on other things that is maybe more concrete to engineering because documentation seems to fall in between chairs a little bit. It's not quite engineering, although it's the engineers that write them. It is not quite quality. The quality tells you what to document, but not necessarily how. In no company that I work with, there is somebody who is officially a technical documentation manager. That position just doesn't exist yet. Will we see it in the future when people realize this has significant impact on our time to market, on how much money and time we spend on this? We will see. We're not yet there, I think. But I think you're correct in terms of innovation and the immense opportunity we have when it comes to sustainability. That is, we need to get there. We need to grasp this opportunity of creating a future for our kids based on innovation and engineering that we're doing. And this will also be something that sets us apart from companies in the United States and definitely in Asia as well. It's such an opportunity. It's such an opportunity.
Yeah, because like if you can implement such a system, you will increase the speed of innovation and decrease the pain of change. Because I think we too, got in contact with each other when a common friend of ours posted something about change management. And then I went off on a little rant because like my experience with change management was the following. So you get around 7 people heads off their individual departments, plus a change requester into a meeting that is usually like you will do it once a week, every 2 weeks. And there's multiple changes going through that change management meeting. And then you will discuss like for, I'd say 15, 20 minutes about the change. And then you get the task to assess the impact of that change with another team, which is then also like 5 people. And then you can't do that because like one is on vacation and the other one is like completely fully booked. So you can do that in like 2-3 weeks and then come back, discuss the change again. And you will have the exact same discussion as you had like 4 weeks before because everybody forgets what was talked about in 4 weeks. And that might be like a completely minor change. Like if, let's say, master batch changing the supplier of its pigment, completely same cost number, completely same quality, color is okay, already sampled. You could do that change. The effort that is put into change control is bigger than the actual work required. And that is just like, I'd say, not even an exaggerated example. It's like companies tend to deal with themselves without output with that system. And I think the basis of that is how we document. And if we can update how we document, you will decrease the pain of the change, which will mean that medical technology will inherently be less change averse, which it currently is. And does that match your experience?
Absolutely. I mean, how many times have I not experienced engineers having brilliant suggestion on how to improve a device, but they get put down by management with the reasoning that, yes, it's a great innovation, it would definitely benefit the customers, but the paperwork involved to get that change out of the door just doesn't warrant. It's just too high of a cost to get the paperwork in place to put that kind of engineering to the market. So if we can lower that bar, that threshold, that work threshold, shuffling paper, we can get more innovation more often out through the door, and everybody will benefit from this. The medical device company will sell more devices. The patients are going to be happier because they have a more effective or maybe safer treatment. It's definitely a win-win. And it's annoying that this technical file dilemma of creating all this paperwork is completely man-made. We made it. People in our generation made that up. And even though I completely agree with we should make sure that the devices that are placed on the market are safe. We don't want to go back to the Wild West snake oil society. We want safe devices. I think we should not be held back by paperwork to provide better and safer devices, if that makes sense.
Okay, so I'm going to play the devil's advocate a little bit because like Word and Excel, they have one key advantage. Everybody knows how to use it. So it's like everybody's very familiar with Word and Excel, and you can take basically any engineer, you can take basically everybody who deals with the technical documentation, put them in front of Word and Excel and expect them to know what is to be done. It's like if you can write a sentence that is somehow grammatically correct, you can use Word and Excel. And if not, there's an extreme amount of support for Word and Excel because it's so widely used. And on top of that, it's very, very cost effective because it's a multi-purpose tool that you can get for, I don't know what Word and Excel costs, like per license, it's like $12 a month or something like that. So it's not very cost intensive. So as a low-tech solution that is very accessible, that Word and Excel work very well. And then what you usually do is like you transform it into a PDF and then put it up on your system. And that is how we always done. It has the distinct disadvantage that it's interdependent and then you have to update everything. If you do something small, it works fine. As the bigger you get, the more headaches you get. And I wonder if that extreme conservative mindset of very big corporations is a symptom of this interdependent documentation, because small startups still are very lean because they don't have too many documents, because they don't have too many products. Big corporations have a big portfolio and they have to deal with this mess. And they also need to employ a lot of engineers to deal with it. And then, as you said, like the effort of changing something is so large that it like completely kills innovation. So to come back and play devil's advocate, it's very accessible and very cost effective. And if you just start small and do something like it for the first time, it's not as bad. So it's still better than paper.
Word and Excel definitely has its place. Yeah. And as you allude to, then not all medical devices are equally complex. There are less complex devices and more complex devices. And the extreme case of a very simple device, if we take a pair of scissors or a scalpel, that can be described from a design control perspective with few items, 5 requirements, 10 specifications, 15 risks. Then these interdependencies are manageable. They are manageable. And the more complex your device will be, and the more kind of engineering domains that get involved. So if you involve hardware and software and firmware and consumables and plastics, and the more different domains that have their specific standards and requirements and guidances, the more content there is to keep track of. So you are correct with that. Word and Excel has their place for low complexity products. I would not agree that just because a kid can use Word and Excel, it's the right tool to be used for design control management. It's not the tool that you can use that predicts the complexity of the problem. What you need an Iron Man suit, all right? You need an Iron Man suit, and that's what we hope that we can provide.
Yes. But like when you talk about these changeover projects, the training is a pain that you need to address, because like the devil I know is better than the devil I don't know, because many companies are also then scared to get themselves into a more of a mess, because like they know that this is painful, and if you don't manage it, it can be painful. They understand that. But it could be that if you change over to something else, that there could be more problems I just do not know of. So training on the system and giving them the confidence, that is probably one of the key points that you need to do.
Absolutely. And a software by no means replaces training. Yeah. You can't write a technical documentation just because you know Word. You need to know what it is. Luckily, in the company that you as a medical device expert work in, there are people that are experts on this. Your quality departments are experts on what the technical documentation should include. And they are probably super good at writing good policies and writing good guides that can teach you and help you write the technical documentation. And then from the other end, with the right tooling, you can do this very efficiently. Do not underestimate the training. It probably has just as big of an efficiency potential as a software tool has.
I think you mentioned something that really struck me, is like they lose confidence in their documentation. And that went through my head like multiple times when we were talking about this. And I think if we can give medical device companies their confidence in their technical documentation back, they will be more daring to try new things. It's not that they will have the time, but they have the confidence, because only those will explore who are confident enough in their ability. And this brings me to one of my favorite topics, and that is using recycling plastics for certain medical devices. Of course, low-risk medical devices, but nevertheless recycle plastics. And I think only those companies who have the confidence in their ability will be able to do it, because using a variable material and getting a consistent outcome is the most difficult thing that you can do in quality management. So you will have to engineer a system so that no matter what input I get, I can either control the input, so I test that the input is right, in this case the material, and then make sure that I always get the right output. Because What companies usually do is they outsource a lot of their material knowledge towards their supplier, and they use a medical grade, and they just tell their supplier, this is the specification of the part, and you just deal with it. So a lot of medical device companies are very close to the clinical application and the problem they're actually solving for the patient and for the physician, but they're not as close to the material. And if you understand a lot about your material, about how that works, how that processes, you will be more confident in using different materials and using different approaches. And that is, I think it's a confidence thing. If you have mastered your craft, you will be exploring the boundaries of what is possible. And I think if you can give them the confidence in their technical documentation and the time they need, then innovation will happen automatically. So that is my train of thought here.
Yeah, I think confidence plays an enormous role in our industry. And partly because it is not always 100% transparent. There is a lot of leeway for interpretation. And if you've never done this, you're not confident because you don't know, will the things that I provide, hold in court, so to say, will they be accepted? If you have a number of submissions under your belt, your confidence increases because you know what works and what doesn't. And this is a hard-earned experience, of course. And confidence, then, the effect of low confidence is unfortunately more work. Okay. And I have examples on that. I've seen it many times. You have a large team of engineers that compile or work on the technical documentation. At some point, it will be submitted or audited. Who is going to face the auditor? That's usually the quality person. All right. So the quality person will defend the documentation. Now, if she or he is not confident and the auditor says, I'm lacking this information in the technical documentation, it doesn't hold water really, then the quality person has two options here. They can take the easy way out and say, you're correct, Mr. Auditor, we will fix that. Or you can take the Lucas way, which is to challenge them, because I know you champion challenging and defending the way that you work. Okay. Why does this make a change? Because I have so often seen quality people just fold in front of an auditor and say, you're right, we shall update all our 15,000 test cases with this additional information that you said, because they just want to get out of the room. They just want to have this audit over with, and they just want to have the signature. They don't care if this creates man years of work further down the line for the people that need to provide this information. So here we see an asymmetry, a power asymmetry between the people that dictate what the technical documentation should contain and the people that actually provide the information. It's, of course, the optimal way would be that those who write the documents has a say in what should be written down or what should be provided. Otherwise, you have this power asymmetry between classically the quality and regulatory. So that's an example of how low confidence can lead to an enormous amount of work. That's one of the main drivers that we see. Why does documentation become bloated? I mean, you talked about lean documentation. Okay, 2025, bloated equals AI, probably, that you can just push a button and just spew out thousands of pages. But if we go a couple of years back, one of the more common reasons why documents became bloated is that somebody in an authoritative position, like an auditor or a notified body person, says, I want to see this. I'm not going to tell you why, but I'm the auditor, so I'm telling you, I want that all test case include the information in what building they were made for some reason, which doesn't make the test cases better or worse. But this guy just want to see this information. And the quality person folds and say, yes, sir, we will provide that. Not a problem. And then you have dozens of people painfully adding this completely unnecessary piece of information to their technical file for no other reason than that the quality person can just leave the room as quickly as possible. Sorry, I may have deviated here a little bit.
No, you have a point, and I think it loops back to the confidence thing, because if you don't have the confidence of understanding what your device is supposed to do and what the regulatory requirements even are, because you're just like stuck all year documenting stuff, you have no actual time to think and to think about your use case and what the regulation really wants from you. And then what you do is like when you are not so confident, you assume the worst case because then you're safe. Confidence leads to, or anxiety leads to the desire for safety, and desire for safety will increase the requirements towards a completely and overly oversafe requirement that is actually not that much needed. If you're confident enough and you know your use case and you know the risk assessment, then you will say, yeah, I mean, I will do this because what's the worst that can happen? Like unironically asking that question, what is the worst that can happen? And if the worst that can happen is like a patient dies, that's probably not acceptable. But if the worst that can happen is like, okay, I may just get a little more scrap at the end because it will always detect because I do 100% control. So what's the worst that can happen? I think about the risks. I document that. I document my reasoning. And if someone comes and says, but why are you doing this? Then you say, yeah, here's the reasoning. I did it. I thought about it and it's justified. And I won't change it because I think it's right. And if not, change my mind. And sometimes it is like this, that the auditor points out something and says, yeah, okay, maybe we can improve here. That's also what an audit is for, to see really, do we have everything in place so that we're confident that this is safe? But you know how many times I've seen arguments and innovation put down with, that is not possible because of regulatory requirements. And like what I usually do in this case is like, okay, what requirements? You just go ask and see how deep their knowledge is. Usually it's very shallow. What happens then is like they tell you, yeah, it's in the MDR. Okay, then tell me which exact article or in which annex or what is the exact passage that you're using here to justify your argument. And then they say, yeah, I don't know. And that's not acceptable because I don't know means that it's an opinion, and opinion should never be a requirement. So that is what happens a lot. And I saw this argument being made against recycled plastics in medical technology a lot. And it doesn't hold water, that argument. Recycled plastics need to be safe and effective, like a normal plastic or every material. And sometimes that is not the case because it's technically not possible to make it safe and effective in like an implantable device. But for whatever, a cover of an electronic, no issue. There's no risk to the patient whatsoever. Safe and effective. It has to be maybe a little flame retardant, but you can make sure that that works. It has to have some mechanical properties. You have to make sure that that works. But you can do that. That's technically possible. So never accept the regulatory requirements as an argument. Just dig deeper and tell me like what is the exact sentence in which regulation you're referring to say that this is not possible. Yeah, that was kind of a rant too. So we both ran off into ranting.
And I think we can translate it to this. I mean, for the C-level people, okay? Confidence translates to money. Okay, not being confident is an added cost that you can avoid. All right? If you take an extra 45 minutes to argue your approach to an auditor and convince him that what you do is compliant, and you can compare the cost of those 45 minutes with the man-years of work to update technical documentation just because of the whim of an auditor, then that's concrete dollars and euros saved. So even if you don't like, if you're a C-level person, yeah, you could care less maybe about how you get to a compliant state. You should care about money, and confidence translates to money.
I think there's nothing to be said about that anymore. Yeah. So what advice would you like to give to our listeners in regards to leaner technical documentation?
Yeah, that's a good question. We can talk a little bit about what we understand with leaner documentation. In my case, what I mean is to spend less time on it. It doesn't mean that there is less pages necessarily or lower quality of the documentation. When I talk about lean, I just mean that can I get the same outcome or even better outcome than I do today with less work? And I think in many cases, software tools can help. Okay. You can do other things as well, as you said. I mean, take a look at the level of training that you have and ask yourself, do I spend a lot of time on this documentation because I don't have the right tooling or because I have lacked the training? I simply don't know what to write. And for larger organizations, of course, you should take a look at the processes themselves. And you should take a really hard look on compliance versus efficiency. Okay? Because those can be pitched against each other when we talk about technical documentation. You know the saying in our industry, if it's compliant, don't fix it. Okay? If it's compliant, don't make any changes. Don't try to be more efficient. Just leave it as it is, because the punishment of not being compliant is a lot higher than not being efficient or effective. But I think there is a lot of potential to be more efficient and effective when it comes to technical documentation. Do not let compliance get the last word every time. Don't go into this fallacy that compliance always trumps efficiency. You can be efficient. There is a possibility to be efficient.
Yeah, I mean, just something to add here is that risk-based approach makes sense also here. It's like there is the mindset of AAA, always and any, means it's just 100% all the time. And let's take material compliance as an example. If you have a screw and you know it's made of steel, but you know the steel number, but you have no documentation whatsoever, and it's just used to like screw a housing in somewhere, it's steel. What's the worst that can be in there? So you just argue there's no risk and say, yeah, I've looked at it. It's still low risk of containing whatever, phthalates or formaldehyde or whatever. That is just not likely to be on or in there, and it has low patient risk, so it's okay. But like 100% person would go and harass the supplier of that screw and ask for all kinds of documentation that is not needed in the first place because there is zero risk of that being in there. So yeah, that is just like a thing here. This is also how we can be leaner, just like have a bit of common sense and just think.
Definitely. And sometimes the work is hidden in very banal manifestations. Like we worked at one company. For some reason, they decided that each test case should be signed off by 4 people. And there were thousands of test cases. Thousands. And I mean, you have worked in larger organizations. You have also run around with copies of papers trying to get signatures from everybody who should sign it. And that's just takes time. And I bet that the reason for why are there 4 people that need to sign off is that at some point in the past, they were in a situation where they realized that 2 people had signed a test case and it was still wrong for some reason. And somebody with authority found that out. And the auditor said, hey, this is wrong. How can it be? You had 2 people. And the solution for them was, well, we need to have more people look at it and sign off on it. That's the solution. But you add so much work to address such an edge case.
Yeah. The ability to say no, that is very important. The ability to know we won't do stupid stuff. Anyways, Karl, do you have any last words?
Not right now. I'm very grateful for being invited to this podcast. It has been a great pleasure for me to participate.
Yes, it was a really wonderful conversation with you, Karl. So this was Karl Larsson from Aligned, and until the next time.
Take care.